We will now hear testimony from Mr. John Winters, a U.S. Coast Guard civilian marine inspector at Coast Guard Sector Puget Sound. Mr. Winters, the board's recorder, Lieutenant Steele, will now administer your oath.
Could you please raise your right hand, sir? A false statement given to an agency of the United States is punishable by fine and/or imprisonment under 18 U.S.C. 1001. Knowing this, do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. You may be seated.
Good morning, Mr. Winters.
Good morning.
I see that you have co-counsel with you here today. Counselors, can you identify yourself for the record?
Yes, good morning. Lieutenant Commander Hillary Wise, Agency Counsel for the Coast Guard.
Good morning, Mr. Nat Eichler, Agency Counsel for the Coast Guard.
Thank you. Mr. Winters, thank you for being here today. Lieutenant Commander Williams will start with your questioning. I'm sorry. Lieutenant Commander Whalen will start with your questions.
Good morning, Mr. Winters.
Good morning.
Again, thank you for being here with us. And as I ask you questions, if you need to take a break, just please let me know and we'll definitely get you a break. There's an exhibit binder, 2 exhibit binders in front of you there. As I bring up exhibits from the recorder, we will put them up on the TVs as well. Before we begin, I'll ask you to please refrain from using any acronyms. If you should use an acronym, I'll stop you and ask you to explain the acronym.
Okay.
Can you please provide me your background in the marine safety field?
I became a Marine inspector in 1985 when I was assigned to MSO Duluth, Minnesota. I retired as an active duty Marine inspector in 2000, and I became a civilian Marine inspector in Sector Seattle, MSO Seattle at the time, now Sector Puget Sound. So I've been a Marine inspector since 1985.
And through the years, can you go up to your present time with that?
Obviously, I was MSO Duluth till 1990. Then I went to MSO Seattle for 1996 active duty, and then I went to MSO San Francisco 96 to 2000 when I retired. And then I went back to MSO Seattle as a civilian Marine inspector in 2000 and been there since.
Okay. And what does MSO stand for?
Marine Safety Office.
Okay. And what is your current position?
I'm currently at Marine Inspector, Master Marine Inspector at Sector Puget Sound. It's a training port, and that's my focus of what my job is, taking trainees out and helping them get qualified to become Marine inspectors.
And can you explain to me what it is to be a Master Marine Inspector?
I believe the criteria, and I don't know if it's changed, was you had to have 4 quals, at least 2 majors, and have 12 years experience.
And you had mentioned training of other Marine inspectors. What are your roles and responsibilities as the Master Marine Inspector at the unit?
So we have the AMI program, which is just a couple of years ago came out. So they have a program where we take apprentice Marine inspectors out to indoctrinate them in the marine inspection field. They have specific criteria that they're supposed to be able to demonstrate to get a sign-off in their PQS, their professional qualification. They have to reach a certain point before they can set for a board before a qualification. So take them out of many inspections, many different inspectors to get them to where their package is complete. They've all the sign-off that they need to have before they can set for the board. That's the goal for each individual inspector that's in the training program.
You had used the acronym AMI, that is Apprentice Marine Inspector, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what inspections qualifications do you hold?
I have 18 marine inspection qualifications. I have brought a list from the thing. If you want them all, I can.
Do you have subchapter T or small passenger vessel?
Yes, I do.
Inspection? Can you explain to me the Coast Guard's role in regulating commercial vessels?
Commercial vessels. The Coast Guard's role is that U.S. code identifies certain vessels that are subject to inspection. So if an entity comes and says, I want to get whatever kind of vessel inspected for whatever role. In this case, we'll just say subchapter T, that obviously the U.S. Code 2101-47 identifies what a small passenger vessel is. It's a vessel less than 100 gross tons carrying more than 6 passengers for hire. And then D, and that is a submersible vessel carrying 1 passenger for hire would be subject to inspection under small passenger vessels. And then 46 U.S.C. 3301, vessels subject to inspection, small passenger vessels are listed there.
And what role does the officer in charge of marine inspections play?
The officer in charge of marine inspection is responsible to see that a vessel is safely operated. He is responsible for seeing that the COI that ultimately is issued after the inspection process is carried out in accordance with the regulations, policy letters, NAVICS, U.S. Code. That's his ultimate goal, responsibility.
So just for 2 clarifications of acronyms within that statement. So COI means,
Certificate of inspection
and the NAVIC,
is navigation and inspection circular.
thank you, sir. You had mentioned all of your or you had stated that you had multiple qualifications. And then you also had mentioned the inspection of submersibles under subchapter T. Is there a specific submersible qualification?
There is not.
And to what regulatory standard are submersibles to be inspected?
Submersibles to be inspected, obviously subchapter T, but 46 CFR 175 to 187 doesn't envision a submarine. So the NAVIC, Navigation Inspection Circular 593, is the appropriate document for inspecting a submersible vessel.
And is that, we can use NAVIC from now on, so we don't have to say it, but is that NAVIC a regulation?
No.
And as a marine inspector, how do you interpret that NAVIC? How do you get to the NAVIC to actually inspect the submersible to that NAVIC?
To get to that is, the OCMI is responsible to see that a vessel is operated safely. And if you don't follow the NAVIC, I don't see how you can say that for a submarine. Is it been built to a standard? Has been maintained to the standard? Do they supply all the equipment that the NAVIC says that it's been based on? Because it's to my recollection, the Coast Guard still does not have a design or construction standard for submersibles. We have to rely on third-party folks, PVH01, pressure vessels for human occupancy, or ABS rules for that. And that's part of my job as a marine inspector would be to see that a submersible vessel has been built, designed, built, and maintained to those standards.
Can you explain to me, as a master marine inspector, the relationship that you have with third parties such as PVHO and ABS, or American Bureau of Shipping?
There's many aspects of the marine industry that we interact with third parties. Either PVHO would be a standard that I believe the Marine Safety Center recognizes that. They even have questions. But in many projects work with ABS, whether it's the alternate compliance program, the load line program. There's many programs you have to work with the ABS surveyor that's on site to come to getting a vessel, whether it's an annual or a COI or an initial COI.
And is it safe to say that these third parties, there are industry partners to help ensure safety and compliance of vessels to regulations?
Yes.
As a master marine inspector, do you think NAVIC 593 provides proper guidance to the attending marine inspector to conduct a thorough inspection of
Yes,
submersibles and its passengers?
Yes, it does. It is dated in a couple of areas.
In which areas do you believe it's dated?
In applicability, it says a small passenger submarine is not inspected till it's 6 passengers, more than 6 passengers. Obviously, the Passenger Vessel Safety Act of '93 changed that to a single passenger. And then portable fire extinguishers, it says you should use a Halon 1301, which the Coast Guard withdrew the approval for years ago. And then obviously, if a fire extinguisher has to be compatible with human life in a confined space, And then we had FM 200, and then we withdrew the approval for that also. So there's some areas in the NAVIC that a person would be unable to comply with just because, I think recently the Coast Guard just approved another firefighting agent that's compatible with personnel in the space.
So at what point from the Authorization Act did the regulation or change from 6 passengers to 1 passengers regarding submersible operations?
Passenger Vessel Safety Act of 1993. I think it was implemented January 6, 1994.
Okay, thank you. Does the Coast Guard provide specific training to marine inspectors for inspecting submersibles?
No.
Have you ever inspected a submersible?
Yes.
And where did you receive that training from?
But when I was an active duty marine inspector, Sector Puget Sound built several, I think a dozen or more submersibles in our AOR, that Atlantis and some other things that were, and I got involved in building those submarines in the early 90s. But I think we started building them in the 80s, and then in the mid-90s, that construction program had ceased.
Just for clarification, the Coast Guard did not build those submersibles.
The Coast Guard witnessed the construction and the certification of.
And at that time, would you say that it was on-the-job training that you learned
Yes.
about submersibles? Is the inspections process initiated by the owner-operator of the vessel or by the Coast Guard?
The owner-operator would submit an application for inspection required by U.S. Code, a CG 3752 application for inspection to start the process.
So as a master marine inspector, having many years of experience, is this still part of your responsibilities? To be part of the process?
Be part of the process. So obviously the owner would submit an application to the office. The office would assign an inspector to that project. And then if it was assigned to me, the first thing we would do is send them what we call a kickoff letter. It would outline what their responsibilities as far as drawings, what policies or regulations they would need to follow to complete the project. And then obviously follow the process with the owner to start, whether it's an existing vessel or it's going to be a constructed vessel. So it makes a big difference in the process. What is an existing vessel or one that's going to be constructed.
And is this process the same for, say, surface vessels and submersibles?
Correct.
Are there currently any inspected submersibles operating out of the Sector Puget Sound Officer in Charge of Marine Inspection Zone?
No.
Are there currently any inspected submersibles that are operating out of any Officer in Charge of Marine Inspection
Yes.
Zones within the Coast
Hawaii
Guard?
has a number.
Have you ever inspected a submersible to Subchapter T standards?
Yes.
Have you ever inspected the Antipodes?
Yes.
Can you talk to me about the process? Provide me your recollection of the Antipodes and their inspections process?
So the Antipodes initially requested to be a Subchapter T vessel, and the process was started. So it was ABS Class A1 submarine, and it was due for their 5-year. So as part of while they initially submitted all the required documents for what it was designed and built to the Marine Safety Center, we started the process of the ABS 5-year out of Chapter 11 of the ABS rules of 2010, and where the gauges were taken out and calibrated. The through-hull fittings were taken out and examined. The lead was dropped. The pressure vessels were hydroed. The electrics went through. All that stuff was as part of the process while the review process was started. And I sat through their 40-hour course for their operations, for the future pilots to get an endorsement on their license as submersible vessel. So I sat in that course for the National Maritime Center in the 40 course, and then did a few test dives to see if that's the practice they were teaching was what they were actually doing in the submarine.
Just want to back up just a little bit on that. So you had mentioned the Marine Safety Center. What is the responsibility of the Marine Safety Center as you know it with regards to plan review for submersibles?
They are our technical advisors. Even if a person were to come from the Marine Safety Center doing whether it's stability or technical for construction, even our unit would always have the owner send that to the Marine Safety Center, and we would look for a letter from the Marine Safety Center about whether they would approve structure, electrical, machinery, whatever. So that in just about every vessel, that would be the process. You would have to submit the drawings to the Marine Safety Center, and we would wait for their letters to return on whether we would proceed or it could go as installed.
Now, is the Marine, and this is as you understand it, is the Marine Safety Center, I guess, attempting to approve the submersible to the construction standards within Subchapter T or the NAVIC 593?
So there's two submarines, classes of submarines. Before the NAVIC submarine was MTN 0496, the Marine Technical Note. And then after the 593 it mentions in there that the standards that we recognize as either the pressure vessels for human occupancy 1 or it's the ABS standards that were developed. So, like I said, I can't speak for the Marine Safety Center. I don't know if there's other standards they would recognize, but that's as far as we would tell the owner that they would need to follow the NAVIC for what they're submitting to the Marine Safety Center to try to streamline the process. Otherwise, it's going to be back and forth, and it's going to delay the project.
And what about standards such as life-saving appliances, firefighting appliances, and means of escape?
So we're going to follow the NAVIC. Because obviously, we have a confined space with a submarine. We don't want you having a CO2 fire extinguisher in a confined space, because that's not going to be very compatible with human life. And there are issues, and it mentions in the NAVIC about getting in and out of the submarine with a Type 1 life jacket could be not feasible to do just because of a small opening. So typically, we require the chase vessel to have the primary life-saving for the passengers on the submarine.
So with the process from MSC, so as a marine inspector, you are guiding the owner-operator through the process.
Correct.
And you will communicate with the MSC, or the Marine Safety Center, the documents that need to be sent from the owner-operator to the Marine Safety Center.
Correct.
And then at this point, once the Marine Safety Center provides direction back to the owner-operator, what is your responsibility as a marine inspector?
Then my responsibility is to see that the vessel has been, if it's already constructed, has been maintained to the standard it was designed and built to. Have there been repairs or alterations? Have they modified any of the electrical systems or machinery systems? Then that would have to be addressed if those have been changed or they were different than what was actually submitted to the Marine Safety. I would verify that the conditions that exist on the vessel are the same as that were sent to the Marine Safety Center. Would be.
So now in the case of the Antipodes, and I believe, who did you work with at Ocean Gate with the Antipodes?
Stockton Rush was a principal person.
Okay. So you had worked with Mr. Rush to send documents to the Marine Safety Center?
Correct.
And at that point, you said while you were waiting on review or plans to come back, what was the steps that you went through outside of the ABS testing that you had just discussed?
Obviously, it's the course and like I said, we basically took the submarine apart, put it back together, and tested every single system on the submarine that while we were waiting for comments to come back from the Marine Safety Center.
And what was the requirement for you had mentioned the 40-hour course. Where did that requirement come from?
I think it's in the NAVIC. It says there's got to be 40 hours of course, 15 hours of operation, of supervised operation, 5 hours unsupervised operation in the class of submarine that the person is looking to get an endorsement on their license for.
Can you explain to me the Coast Guard credentialing process and what an endorsement means? Not necessarily the full process. Is a operator, by operator I mean pilot or person who drives the vessel, are they required to be licensed by the Coast Guard if they plan on carrying passengers?
Correct, yes.
And then what does that, so within that license, you have an endorsement. What does that endorsement mean?
That endorsement means that obviously they've had 40 hours of instruction in the class of submarine. They have 15 hours of supervised operation. They have 5 hours of unsupervised operation. And then that would all be submitted to the National Maritime Center for them to put an endorsement on their operator of a small passenger vessel.
And is that endorsement a captain of the port specific requirement?
I'm not 100% specific sure, but the NAVIC requires that endorsement. And then obviously, I think the OCMI would follow the NAVIC on requiring that, just like an auxiliary sail endorsement. If you've got an auxiliary sail vessel, you have to have that endorsement on your license to operate that.
Do you know if the Coast Guard has a submersible operation license?
I do not. I'm not aware. Like I say, I don't know where I don't know what like I say, I'm unaware of what the infinite requirements of that are.
Understood. So at this time, in the timeline, this is roughly, do you remember what year this was approximately?
2010.
2010. And in 2010, as they are awaiting their communication with MSC, what was, after the inspection process with the ABS, did the Antipodes request an oceanographic research vessel designation for operation?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Was-
Can you tell me what an oceanographic research vessel designation letter is?
Yes, it's the Marine Safety Manual, and that time had a page B 442 had an example. An oceanographic research vessel, the Office of the U.S. Code says what it has to be. It has to be operated exclusively in oceanographic research, and it lists a bunch of different types of seismic stuff, oceanographic study, and the letter lists that they have to be operated exclusively in that oceanographic research to retain that letter.
Does a vessel who attains and we'll call it ORV, rather than say an oceanographic research vessel designation every time. So is an ORV vessel required to be inspected to act as an ORV?
No. Well, I guess I should qualify that. If it's over 300 gross tons, then it has to be inspected as an oceanographic research vessel. If it's less than 300, it's not inspected.
Was the Antipodes over 300 gross tons?
No. Just to clarify, the U.S. Code in definitions identifies what an oceanographic research vessel does. It doesn't identify when one's become inspected or uninspected. You have to go to the 46 CFR 2.01-7, column 6, to find out which one is inspected and which one is not. And obviously, the break point is 300 gross tons, and according to that, the seagoing motor vessel falls into that category where a yacht would be, if it's over 300, would be inspected under the seagoing motor. Subchapter U would be inspected under oceanographic research under subchapter U if it's over 300.
Thank you. Are submersibles able to be designated as oceanographic research vessels?
Yes.
How does the oceanographic research vessel designation request process work? And as a marine inspector, is there any standards that you're verifying on this vessel?
Uninspected, so 46 CFR Part 24 to Part 26 for an uninspected vessel. The Marine Safety Manual talks about B440 to B442, and B474 and 75 addresses submersible vessels. I would visit the vessel, any kind of vessel, whether it's a submersible or not. Is it suitable platform for the intended use? Is it being maintained? Is it have the proper, even the limited equipment that's in that thing, does it have that equipment on that? The people got some kind of, they don't require to have a license, but some kind of training. Obviously, a submersible vessel would go a lot further down the rabbit hole of qualifications and stuff just because of the inherent danger of a vessel that may get entangled or whatever, not be able to come back so it would, even though the regulations don't require it, before those, OCMI would be amenable to signing an oceanographic research vessel letter to a submersible vessel, we'd have to go further than, we'd go further than just the uninspected 24 to 26, just because of the inherent danger.
But that's not required under
It's
regulation?
not required under things.
And why did you take it upon yourself to go out and conduct or do a more in-depth investigation?
Well, we
Or
started,
spelling my last, inspection.
the inspection is, the inspection started, the physical stuff for what was on the submarine, how it was maintained, how it was built, had already been gone through. We'd taken this, I would never get to following the NAVIC or ABS rules for taking the thing apart to get an oceanographic research vessel letter. That had already been accomplished. Went in to dive at it to 936 feet to say, it was far, far above what any rules would require for oceanographic research vessel.
Lieutenant Steele, can you please bring up Exhibit 002, which is our Antipodes documentation?
002.
Yeah, the first one.
And if you can scroll to the activity summary, I believe it's,
Okay,
yep, right there. Can you go down one page? So, Mr. Winters, are you familiar with what you see on that page and as well as on the
yes.
TV? And what are we looking at?
You're looking at my missile entry for what was accomplished on the Antipodes in 2010.
And can you provide me the acronym for missile?
Marine information,
I can fill in here, sir. It's the Coast Guard's database for prevention information. The acronym is Marine Information for Safety and Law Enforcement.
Thank you, sir. So missile from
Yes.
here on out. We'll call it, so what is missile as for a Marine inspector? If you can explain to the public what that is.
it's how we document our activities when any particular vessel for historical use. If we were to issue a requirement that would be cleared in another port, that the other port would want what we found to be deficient in the thing, or if it had a partial COI in one zone and moves to another, that other zone would want to know what you actually did as far as a vessel progressing toward the COI. So and even subsequent inspections down the road, you would refer to past inspections to see if was there any exemptions or equivalencies granted, or is there special notes about inspecting something because it's an issue or whatever. So it's a very important document, especially for, not only for its initial thing, but for subsequent inspections down the road.
So this inspection in which you did here, along with ABS, is not a standard inspection for a oceanographic research vessel designation.
Correct, is not a standard one.
Did Sector Puget Sound place any additional requirements on OceanGate and the Antipodes to retain or attain a oceanographic research vessel designation?
We require them to submit an operations manual, which was approved, and I think I didn't bring a copy, but it's in the documents for if you look at the missile entry and documents, that operations manual is in missile.
And is that a standard requirement for ORV designation?
The operations manual is how they defined how they were going to be used exclusively as an oceanographic research vessel. It wouldn't be a typical, for a surface vessel, it wouldn't be typical. I would look, a surface vessel, I would look for, do you have a contract with University of Washington, National Marine Fisheries, or some other person you're doing to show that you're being operated exclusively in some kind of oceanographic research? We would require the owner to demonstrate that they were operated exclusively in oceanographic research prior to issuing the letter.
And did they provide that to you in this case?
Yes.
And who were they working for exclusively?
They had different things. The first thing went down to LALB, and did some dives there for some folks, and I don't know what the actual ones, but LALB had a participated in the approval of that manual back.
And so for acronym, LAOB
Is Los Angeles,
Long Beach.
LALB, Los Angeles,
Long Beach. Yep. Okay. And so just back to the Oceanographic Research Vessel designation letter, is that only, is that specific to each officer in charge of marine inspection zone? So can they operate on the sector Puget Sound ORV designation letter in sector Los Angeles, Long Beach?
Correct. Or Miami, in this case, they went to Miami. They've operated in many different zones over the years.
And did yourself or anybody from sector Puget Sound make notification to the other sectors that there was a operation coming to operate in that area?
Yes.
And why is that notification made?
That notification is made just so that if the local OCMI has any restrictions on a vessel's operation or zone-specific requirements, that they could obviously get in contact with the owner or tell me that these specific zone requirements need to be included in their operations, what they were going to do, whether it's a different kind of life-saving, operated, there's areas we don't want you diving in because the wrecks or whatever have entanglements that we know about that we don't want you operating, and you can't do that. So I would communicate that with the owner and then put them in touch with whoever the other zone designated as a person to be the go-between and communicate with.
So all the while throughout this time, the Antipodes is attempting to get a small passenger vessel certification.
Correct.
At what point did the Antipodes ever attain a small passenger vessel certificate of inspection?
No.
Are you aware of why not?
Antipodes wanted to dive anywhere there was 1,000-foot bottom. Coast Guard I'm not aware of them approving anything over 150 feet. And if you look at the Atlanta submarines certificate of inspection, it specifically sells that out. You can't dive anywhere where it's more than 150 feet deep. So that they would not, I guess, not turn loose of that. That's their main mission was to dive anywhere as 1,000 feet. And when headquarters, it went back and forth many times to headquarters, and then they changed to oceanographic research vessel when they couldn't get that.
In that requirement or the restriction to, which is 45 meters, roughly 150 feet, is found in NAVIC 593?
Correct.
And why is that at 45 meters or?
It's about the limits of what a diver can go down and hook a line on the thing. If you look at the Atlanta submarines certificates, they have to have 2 divers on board that they can have in the water within an hour if the submarine can't mix it up. So that's one of the reasoning behind that.
And does an oceanographic research vessel designation have that restriction, or can they dive to any depth that they want?
They would dive at any depth that's certified for it. I'm unaware of any restrictions that would be placed on that. There's no regulatory authority to do that. Obviously, you'd have to go down the manifestly unsafe voyage or something, then it gets complicated.
So just so a vessel that attains a U.S. Coast Guard certificate of inspection has a restricted dive limit to 45 meters. And a vessel that does not have Coast Guard inspection or is not inspected to Coast Guard standards can dive to whatever depth that they want.
Let's say, I'm unaware of any restriction. Obviously, it talks about submarines being used in the Marine Safety Manual before page 74, 75, and it doesn't really reference, there's nothing that I'm aware of that would restrict that vessel. It's just there's no regulatory requirement that I'm aware of to restrict that.
Did you ever have any discussions with Mr. Rush regarding the inspections requirements for small passenger vessels?
On many occasions.
Do you recollect or remember any of those conversations, and what was in your conversations, his opinion of the small passenger vessel regulations?
When the process changed, when they gave up the inspected vessel to 1,000 feet. He did express on multiple occasions that regulations were stifling his innovation process.
And do you believe that once he realized, or once there, not your opinion, but in your conversations, when he realized that he could not get the small passenger vessel certificate to operate with passengers, and understood the non-restriction of the ORV, that now became the way forward for Mr. Rush?
They came up with their own, on their own thing, and then applied for the ORV designation.
Are you familiar with the Cyclops 1?
Yes, I am.
Did the Cyclops 1 ever apply for inspection?
Yes. Sector Puget Sound has issued 3 ROV letters, 2018, 2020, 2022.
Did they ever apply for inspection?
No.
Did you have any conversations with Mr. Rush regarding of the reason they did not apply for inspection?
No.
To your knowledge, the Cyclops 1, did they provide for you a operations manual with regards to the Cyclops 1?
Yes, we went through the same process about them demonstrating that it was going to be used for oceanographic research purposes in accordance with what the U.S. code says it required to be.
Did they operate outside of the sector Puget Sound?
I'm not, like I say, I'm not totally aware where they've operated. I haven't seen, I looked at missile and I didn't see any missile activities from other units. Where Antipodes has a bunch, sector San Francisco made them, several units have made them jump through the, demonstrating that they're still operating exclusively in oceanographic research. But I'm not aware of any other units entering a missile activity for Cyclops 1.
So sector Puget Sound, according to your search and missile, is the only Coast Guard unit to issue an oceanographic research vessel designation.
Correct.
Per Coast Guard policy and oceanographic research vessel guidance, would they be able to operate without an oceanographic research vessel designation in another captain of the port zone?
They would have to operate in any Coast Guard captain port zone as an oceanographic research vessel. You'd have to have the letter. Some OCMI would have to have issued you an oceanographic research vessel letter.
Who's allowed to participate in these operations? Who's allowed to be carried on board the vessel?
It's scientists. Obviously, U.S. code defines what a scientist is. In 2101 defines what a scientist is.
And has that policy changed? Or has that guidance on what a scientific personnel is?
It's updated that the not having the age of the scientist having anything has changed. That was added after Antipodes got there. They added, I think D is about that you can't take into account the age of the scientist when you're talking about scientific personnel.
So as a marine inspector, how do you interpret that? So the person on board a oceanographic research vessel designation can be 1 year old to be considered a scientific personnel?
Like I say, U.S. code says you cannot take into account the age of the scientist.
So we talked briefly about the role of the Classification Society with regards to the inspection of the Antipodes. What is the Coast Guard's role in working with classification societies in conducting inspections of vessels?
That would depend on what class of vessel, because obviously if it's just a load line vessel, we would work with ABS and load line because they administer the program for us. If it's an alternate compliance program vessel where they're issuing all the certificates except for the COI and the security certificate, we have a much closer rule about actually meeting with the surveyor when they're finishing up their surveys before they sign all the certificates that they're issuing in the Coast Guard's name. So it depends on the class of vessel, how much time we would spend with the actual ABS surveyor.
Was the Antipodes registered in the state of Washington?
Yes, it has a WN number.
Was the Cyclops 1 registered in the state of Washington?
It has a WN number.
Is that something as a marine inspector that you would look into to ensure that they're in compliance with state registration?
Correct. Obviously, U.S. code and the regulations, it has to be 5 net tons before it can be documented. Antipodes was nowhere close to being 5, so it was not eligible for documentation. So then it would often have to be, we would expect, like say, to have a WN number for us to progress down that road.
So the requirements for it to be a U.S. vessel is either a federally documented, over 5 net tons required, or a numbered for the state?
Correct.
And within the state of, you're in the state of Washington, are you familiar with the state of Washington registration requirements?
I'm not fully sure. I've had boats that are registered to the things, and I don't know, obviously it had a WN number, and I don't know what the actual physical requirements that they would have for a submarine.
So you're not familiar whether, if submarines are required to be
I think it meets the
registered?
definition of a watercraft that would require to be numbered.
Did OceanGate ever do a request or an application for inspection for the Titan Submersible?
No,
Did they ever request a oceanographic research vessel designation letter for the Titan Submersible?
no,
Did OceanGate ever make notification to the Coast Guard for construction or assisting in construction standards for the Titan Submersible?
no. I guess I have to preface, none that I am aware of. Right?
Did you ever have any conversations with Mr. Rush regarding the Titan Submersible?
No. I was in passing. I saw 3 of the submersibles on a barge. They were taking this somewhere. As we finally got our submarine to go to the Titanic, but that was the only thing in passing. Nothing about what it was constructed to, who witnessed, none of that stuff. It's just here it is. Just look at the outside. While I was there for one of the oceanographic vessel of one of their other ones. But as far as Titan, I saw it, and that's as far as it went.
And when was that, roughly?
I'm not even sure, about 2022 maybe, I don't know for sure.
And where were you located, or where was this?
Everett, Washington.
Was it at their facility?
It was at a marina where the barge was located that they had them on, and I don't know if it was their facility was on land that they would haul them up to in an airplane hangar that they converted to their operations.
Did Mr. Rush ever discuss his operations plan with you?
No. I guess back up. He had previously stated in 2010 that he wanted a submarine capable of taking people to the Titanic on multiple occasions.
Did he ever discuss with you or seek guidance in a discussion regarding passenger fees or mission specialist fees or paying for operations?
No.
Were you ever aware at any time that there was operations conducted using the Antipodes and/or Cyclops with passengers that were paying?
It's not in that aspect. Obviously, I'm assuming that they would have a contract with whoever the research entity was. It wasn't research for, obviously, some kind of monetary compensation for using the submarine for the research. But as far as the individuals paying, I'm not aware that any individual actually paid.
So did you ever provide any guidance to Mr. Rush regarding regulations covering his vessels to include the Titan?
Never a discussion about including the Titan in any of their
I'll
operations.
rephrase that, sir, because we just discussed over multiple times about the regulations. Did you ever provide any guidance to Mr. Rush regarding regulations covering the Titan?
No.
Thank you, sir. That's all the questions I have.
Mr. Winters, we've been going for a while. Would you like to take a break before we
I'm good.
continue?
If you guys are good, I'm good.
Okay. I just have some follow-ups from Commander Whalen's questioning, sir. In regards to the observation of the Titan Submersible around 2022, what was your understanding of that vessel's status? And by that, I mean, did you assume anything about that?
I did not assume anything. We didn't get into about what standards it was built to, who built it, none of that was discussed. It's just, hey, we have a submarine, now we can go to, it's good for 4,000 meters. And that was just kind of, we have a submarine to do that now. No discussion about what rules it complied with or what they anticipated using, obviously anticipated using it to go to the Titanic, but there was no conversations about how it was constructed, who constructed it, or anything like that.
Would you assume if it was going to be a U.S. operation that he would apply to Sector Puget Sound for inspection or an ORV letter?
Yes, I would assume that, since they already have two vessels that they went through that process on, obviously he knew the process because he had two vessels that one vessel that tried to go through the inspection standards and two vessels that had ORV letters.
For the ORV letters from Sector Puget Sound, did you require full classification by a third-party class society?
No.
Is that something you checked for before providing an ORV letter?
No.
Are you aware that the Cyclops did not have full classification?
I'm not aware that whether it was classed or not.
Lieutenant Steele, I'd like to call up United States Code definition for scientific operations. If you can just give me a moment here, sir. This is Title 46, Section 2101, and then the bullet for scientific operations. Actually, the definition for oceanographic research vessel under 24. Do you have it? Okay. I think this is actually the definition. What exhibit do we have here?
This is Exhibit 002.
06?
Exhibit 002 provides an excerpt from the statute that I'm referring to.
24, I've got that.
So, Mr. Winters, my question, if you read this, the definition of oceanographic research vessel, I'm going to read it into the record, means a vessel that the Secretary finds is being employed only in instruction in oceanography or limnology or both, or only in oceanographic or limnological research, including studies about the sea such as seismic, gravity meter, and magnetic exploration, and other marine geophysical or geological surveys, atmospheric research, and biological research. So, sir, my question on this is, from Sector Puget Sound's interpretation of this, could a citizen, non-scientist, who is donating to an organization or third or nonprofit, conduct underwater observations under the ORV designation?
I guess you'd have a stretch on them being scientific personnel. You'd have to get down into some things as far as, are they in a course that's for that, in a school program? Are they employed by University of Washington, Washington State Fisheries or National Marine Fisheries or something? Obviously, if that was their position, you would say that they could do that. But as far as getting down who they took on every voyage, we never vetted through that.
Understand. So Sector Puget Sound's interpretation was of this provision in the law was it had to be a scientist.
Correct.
Could it be like university students that are
To me,
studying?
if they're all in a program for oceanographic research or one of those other ones, if they're involved in a program that they're taking instruction in that, they could very well meet the scientist definition of that's how they're getting their education or their degree in that whatever particular field that's listed in there.
And so, would you like to, is there a clarification, sir?
Obviously, that's like I say, that was up there, the definition of scientific personnel, and then it would.
Okay. For the record, sir, I want to clarify, from your experience, you listed several marine safety offices that you had served at under the Coast Guard, and now you were at Sector Puget Sound. I just want to clarify that Marine Safety Office is the same type of unit, and that the Coast Guard changed two sectors for Sector Puget Sound after 9/11. Is that
Correct.
correct?
It was actually Sector Seattle first, and then Sector Puget Sound, if you want to be technical.
Yes, sir. But I just wanted to say that it's the same type of duties.
Yes, correct. It didn't change my duties one bit.
And sir, I want to talk about the Cyclops operations. I believe you said that Sector Puget Sound issued 3 ORV designation letters to Cyclops?
2018, 2020, 2022.
And how long is each letter good for?
2 years.
And did you say that you checked the Coast Guard missile system database to see if Cyclops had operated in other zones? Did I get that right?
So I looked in the missile database, and it only has the stuff R3 ORV letters in there. It doesn't have an ORV letter or an inspection from another zone.
And I want to make sure I understood that. I believe you said during earlier testimony that an ORV letter issued by Sector Puget Sound could be good for another zone. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you may not see an ORV letter from another zone?
It may not. In the case of Antipodes, there were several, because it's since 2010. I think Miami issued one, and some other ports have issued ORV letters for the Antipodes.
In addition to Sector Puget Sound's
Correct.
ORV letter? So is it fair to say that the Coast Guard's oversight of ORVs is inconsistent in that instance then? If the Cyclops were operating in other zones?
Each zone would have its own, I guess, standards as far how far are we going to delve into the operations of an oceanographic research vessel letter, what its operation is, hazards in the zone. So it could be zone specific about how much attention was paid to any individual vessel based on their operations in its. So that's a hard question to answer for some other zone what they're going to do.
So typically, the Coast Guard would have entered some kind of activity in the missile database, maybe not a new ORV letter, but some kind of risk assessment.
If they were to have done that, they should have. And like I say, I haven't seen anything with Cyclops. Antipodes, there's some other zones letters about them having the company verify that they're still operating exclusively as an oceanographic, meeting the definition of oceanographic research vessel. MSO San Francisco did, and some other sectors have had some missile entries about Antipodes, but not Cyclops. Not that I'm aware of, anyway.
Thank you. I'd now like to discuss what happens at Sector Puget Sound if a passenger vessel or submersible is found operating in your zone without a proper certificate of inspection or ORV letter. Does that ever occur?
Not for a submarine, but for other vessels, yes. Then obviously our investigation office gets involved in them hauling passengers for hire without a COI. Obviously, that's a violation of the U.S. code. So that can come down to a fine being assessed against the owner or the operator. If the person has a master's license, the Coast Guard may choose to revoke that person's master's license. if they're operating without the proper ORV letter or the COI.
And sir, just for the record, I want to clarify that the Coast Guard has changed from master's licenses to merchant mariner credentials?
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm dating myself.
Thank you, sir. That's all the questions I have at this time. I think it would be good to take a 10-minute break before
Okay.
we continue.
Yeah.
The hearing will recess and reconvene at 12:20. The hearing is now back in session. Mr. Winters, I just have a couple more questions before I go over to the NTSB. Are you now familiar with the Titan operations over the Titanic wreck site?
I am not. I guess all I can say is what I've read in the newspaper, but as far as any other thing,
If you were aware, or if you became aware as a marine inspector at Puget Sound, that an experimental vessel that was being built in your zone was going to be conducting dive operations over a wreck site with scientific personnel, and it was not inspected or examined by the Coast Guard, are there any actions available to the Coast Guard at that point?
I would
Mr.
start
Newbar,
off by,
Okay, I'm sorry.
Can I just clarify, you're asking if this operation, maybe I missed this, was in international waters or if in the zone, in Puget Sound?
I'm sorry, I was talking about at the Titanic wreck site, so international waters. If, I'm asking the witness, if he became, hypothetically, if the Coast Guard became aware of an operation that was going to be experimental with scientific personnel in international waters, but was being constructed in their zone, I want to know what actions the Coast Guard could take in that instance.
Right, understood, but that was public information, the expeditions had been publicized, correct? So it's not really, it was known. I mean, are you asking if there was a specific application made to the Coast Guard of some sort? Because I guess the confusion here is that this was known, that these expeditions were taking place. So if you're asking, it's not a hypothetical, we can show the brochure.
Okay, let me rephrase. Is there an action that Sector Puget Sound could have taken with the knowledge that was known about the Ocean Gate operations to stop the operation?
it was not happening in our zone, so I think that would have to be referred to Coast Guard headquarters or the U.S. Attorney for what laws would actually apply. Because actually OCMI's actions are limited to what's in his AOR. So if the vessel was not located in Sector Puget Sound's AOR, our actions as far as what we could specifically apply to the vessel would be very limited. Not registered in international waters, I think we'd be outside of the scope of a sector doing something about that. That's my personal opinion. I don't know what regulatorily wise, I couldn't speak to that.
But as a marine inspector, you're generally
Obviously, if I
understand.
became aware of something like that, I would have to run that through our investigations office for them to take the matter up to see what actions the Coast Guard could take as far as would be my reporting it to the investigations office for them to take up to see what we were going to apply or what actions we would take.
Does the Coast Guard have the authority to control a vessel in its zone, including under construction?
Under construction, I mean, if it were to be operated, you probably, if it didn't have anything, you'd probably have to go under the manifestly unsafe voyage or some other issue like that. Or is it a threat for pollution or some other thing where you use a captain port order or admin order? So it would definitely get down to the lawyers being involved pretty heavily in something like that.
Are you aware of, over your career, of a situation where you had to issue a captain of port order to a vessel under construction to prevent operations?
Not under construction, the ones that have been constructed that were operating without COIs or appropriate licensed credentialed mariners.
And to clarify, would that be operating in your zone?
Correct.
From your experience, would a vessel like the Titan be required to be registered or flagged by the United States?
So to be required to be documented, it must be 5 net tons and used commercially. So if it didn't meet the criteria for being documented, 5 net tons, then before we could give it an oceanographic research vessel letter, whatever, it have to be registered with the state. And that says of the rules that under 33 CFR 175, the state numbering system would have to be registered in the state.
Is it your understanding that a vessel like the Titan operating in international waters would need some type of registration or flag documentation?
That's outside of my area of expertise.
Okay, understand. At this time, I'd like to go to the National Transportation Safety Board.
Good morning, sir. I have a few follow-ups, and I apologize ahead of time for bouncing around a little bit.
That's no problem.
Along the lines of Mr. Neubauer's questions, if I were to take my otherwise uncertified, unclassed, but U.S.-built submersible and put it on a U.S. flag surface tender and launch it in international waters, what rules would I have to apply?
So obviously, if it's a U.S. registered vessel that's hauling around, the Coast Guard has vast jurisdictions depending on what their operations are. Is it certified to haul this vessel? Whatever it would, like say, what are the operations? What is it certified to do? And then what's the nature of the operations? It could get down to where the OCMI could put a captain port order on the vessel hauling around not to leave port if they believe the operations weren't safe. It's Coast Guard's job is to protect people's lives. That's why we became an organization over 100 years ago.
So would the requirements in T or the NAVIC or the ORV rules apply only because I'm being launched from a U.S. flagged surface tender or a dive support vessel or a OSV?
So the rules, it would depend on, it's like say,
I'm curious if the submersible has to meet U.S. regulations solely because it's launched from a U.S. flagged vessel.
it would, being launched from a U.S. vessel would not impact what the submersible would have to be inspected or ORV letter or a COI. That would go specifically to the submarine, not to the vessel launching it.
Would the submersible have to meet the surface tender's safety management certificate system, assuming it had one?
It would be, if it's inspected, then obviously we have the chase vessel requirements that are, if we look at it, I gave them a copy of the Atlantis, one of the Atlantis submersibles that's inspected about the chase vessel, people being involved, divers being on that kind of stuff like that. If we're inspected, we would expect the chase vessel to provide the life-saving and some other stuff for the submersible.
Are the surface tenders inspected too? Are there requirements for specifically for surface tenders, or what the
It would
IMO
have to
calls
meet
surface
some other
facilities?
criteria. If it was a freight vessel, it'd have to be over 15 gross tons. If it was oceanographic research, it'd have to be over 300 gross tons. So it depends on what specific category that surface vessel was either inspected to or operating under. So that would be a vessel-by-vessel case about what standards that would have to apply to that vessel.
A few people have testified that OceanGate would let the Coast Guard know whenever they were doing some sort of operations, whether it was for sea trials or an actual operation. What happens internally at the Coast Guard when that notification comes in?
So typically for Antipodes, when they were operating, they would notify VTS where and when they were going to be operating a dive. And then that VTS would communicate to the inspection department that Antipodes had a dive schedule, and did we want to participate in anything, whether we want to validate something. But technically, then through sector, there'd be a notification that activities would be operating, especially if you're operating near the traffic lanes, then had a lot more attention paid to it if it was going to be operating near the traffic lanes.
Would the VTS operator know to check for a state registration?
I'm not aware of that. I don't know what their training or their watch standards would be they would look in missile, and if it's in missile with an ORV letter, I think they would probably be pretty close to the end of their investigation about if it had the proper paperwork to operate.
Is it correct to say that not all state registered vessels are going to show up in missile?
Not all state registered vessels are going to show up in missile. Only ones the Coast Guard's had an interaction with that we've actually entered the vessel in missile.
I understand you don't have missile in front of you, but do you know offhand if there's any marine casualties that didn't rise to the level of a major marine casualty? In other words, incidents that the Coast Guard would be aware of, specific to submersibles that the NTSB would not be aware of?
I'm not aware of any.
Can I be dual certified as an ORV and as a T-boat?
Say again?
Can I be dual certified as an ORV and as a T-boat?
No, because the U.S. Code says you must be operated exclusively as an oceanographic research vessel. If you have the letter and you're not going to do that, you have to turn, it says right on the letter, you have to turn the letter in. So it would have to be an unusual circumstance where you would have a dual as a passenger vessel, and that would go far above my pay grade for granting that.
Have you ever issued or come across a safety compliance certificate for passenger submersible craft that's issued in accordance with the IMO guidelines?
No, I have not.
I understand Atlantis was the impetus for the NAVIC. What was the push behind the IMO guidelines?
So obviously Atlantis started building submarines before the NAVIC, and those were built under the MTN 0496 policy. And then once the 593 came out, then the additional requirements were put on their COIs as far as following the NAVIC. So we have obviously submarines built to two different policies, one to 0496 MTM, the technical standard from the Marine Safety Center, and then the NAVIC came out in July of 93, which then we followed that policy. And up to the ones that were started were built before, then obviously that was both, that they graduated from the MTN to the NAVIC.
On a different topic, does the sector have a liaison officer with the local OSHA?
With local
Local OSHA inspectors?
I'm not aware of any that are somebody's collateral duty may be, but I'm unaware of that.
Are you aware of any cross-training or joint inspections with OSHA?
Not with OSHA.
And my last question would be, I heard you say that Mr. Rush thought that the regulations were stifling innovation. Is that something you would concur with?
He said that on multiple occasions.
Would you concur with that?
And in what aspect?
The restrictions in the NAVIC are,
It's, as far as that, he never attempted to circumvent any regulations or any requests or requirements that we were putting on Ocean Gate. There was never an attempt by Ocean Gate to circumvent any of those or not comply with.
are there specific provisions in the NAVIC that he was particularly upset with? Like, such the,
The 1,000-foot, the 150-foot bottom was the major sticking point on the whole process.
okay. Thank you for your time today, sir.
Mr. Fawcett?
Yes, sir. Keith Fawcett, thank you for being here. So when you talked about Puget Sound, you talked about the vessel traffic service and the notification that the diving operations were going to take place. Is that correct?
Correct.
So was the notification to the inspections division only because there was a vessel traffic service there to get a report?
The policy letter about ORVs says that they should be reporting their operations to the VTS, and they were complying with that.
Do you know that the majority of the OCMI zones do not have vessel traffic services?
I'm aware of that.
Do you have knowledge that the Port of Boston in the OCMI zone of Sector Boston does not have a VTS?
I'm not specifically, I couldn't recite which ones do and which ones don't.
Thank you, sir.
Commander Whelan? Lieutenant Commander Williams.
Does an ORV designation specific for submersibles require the submersible to be classed to a classification society's rules?
No.
If you had specific questions regarding the definition or interpretation of the definition of scientific research personnel or oceanographic research vessels, who would you reach out to?
CBC?
And can you define that, please? Is it commercial vessel compliance?
Yeah, correct, yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Commander Whelan?
Mr. Winters, you had stated that the Sector Puget Sound had issued oceanographic research vessel designation for the Cyclops 1 in 2018, 2020, and 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
Were you aware of operations that happened in September 2020 out of the Port of New York to the Hudson Canyon?
No, I was not.
Thank you.
And sir, just to clarify for the record, when you said that OceanGate or Mr. Rush did not attempt to circumvent regulations in the timeframe, that was during the timeframe that you were working with him?
2010, when the process was going through with either the certification as a subchapter T or oceanographic research.
Until what time?
My associated in August of 2010 ended with them actually physically interacting with OceanGate.
And sir, one additional hypothetical, and if you can't answer or don't know, just let me know. But if there was a foreign submersible being constructed in your zone, would you have any authority, inspections authority over that submersible?
I'm unaware of what that would be. I would say I'd have to reach out to the legal team of the Coast Guard to see what our jurisdictional authority would be.
Thank you, sir. At this time, I'd like to go to OceanGate Council for questions.
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Winters, I'd like to take another 10-minute recess just to make sure that the board doesn't have any additional questions for you.
Okay.
All right, the hearing is now back in session. At this time, does the board or OceanGate Council have any final questions?
Not from us, thank you.
No. Okay. Mr. Winters, is there anything that we didn't ask you that you think would be valuable to the investigation, recollections from your time with OceanGate?
I think it's all been explained.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your time and cooperation with the board. You are now released as a witness at this formal hearing. Thank you for your testimony. If I later determine that this board needs additional information from you, I will contact you through your co-counsels. If you have any questions about this investigation, you may contact our investigation recorder, Lieutenant Kelly Steele. Thank you, sir. We will now adjourn for lunch and reconvene at 1:45.